Hey guys, I'm Jen McKnight and you're listening to the Mind Bean podcast. Here we talk about everything that has to do with mindset, success, and creating the dream life you want. Now today I am really excited because we are speaking about a topic that is very close to my heart and I'm passionate about it. And that is how to overcome anxiety. Why? Because personally it's something I've struggled with for years. And also, I know so many of my clients that go through the same thing. So we have a really special guest, Dr. Melissa Gentry, who's joining the show today. She is a professional and expert in the field of clinical psychology and mind-body wellness. She's also a certified clinical hypnotherapist, advanced tantra educator, and she's trained in EMDR and neuropsychological testing. Guys, when I say she is an expert in the field of anxiety and panic disorders, that is an understatement. She has helped countless people across the globe manage their anxiety and get their mind and body in a much better state, okay? So you do not want to miss out on her practical tips on how to manage anxiety in your daily life. There are so many people that need this, and I know that this episode is going to be mind-blowing and it's really going to help so many people. So that is what we're here for. I am so excited. Guys, whether you're new to this topic, whether you know someone that's got anxiety, or maybe you're even worried about your kids, listen up, bookmark this, share this podcast, and really engage with the practical techniques that Dr. Melissa Gentry proposes on the podcast. So without further ado, I cannot wait to introduce to you Dr. Melissa Gentry. Thank you for joining our show.
What you gonna do when the rain is coming down? Nothing more to do when there's no one else around. Bring it back to the middle, push, take it back to the rhythm. Thank you, Jennifer, so much for having me on your show. I'm delighted to be here.
Oh, I'm excited to have you here, Dr. Melissa, and thank you for joining us again. You know, I know that whatever we discuss today will definitely help somebody in their life, and that's why we're here. So I'm going to kick off, before we go deep into the topic, I want to kick off with a very simple question because I want to make sure that everybody listening has a baseline understanding of what anxiety is. So first question to you. What is the difference between anxiety and regular stress? Is there a difference between the two?
Absolutely. Stress is the body's natural response to any demand or challenge that we perceive like as a threat, and it doesn't last very long. So say you have like a big test coming up or you have a big work interview and you're stressed about it. After it's over, you're probably not going to be stressed anymore. Whereas anxiety is prolonged and you're going to feel this unease for a longer period of time, 6 months or more to have a generalized anxiety disorder. So that's that prolonged, overwhelming, dis-ease feeling.
Okay. And what is the difference between having unhealthy and healthy anxiety? And I'll give you two examples in my life. So and I often tell this to clients as well. When you have what I call healthy anxiety, it's often your body telling you that something's not right, that you either need to change direction or the universe is saying to you, listen, something's not right. You're not where you're meant to be. Where can you grow? What are you meant to be doing? What needs to emerge out of your life? And that to me is healthy anxiety because your body is almost functioning as a compass to say, you need to go here or there. When I believe there's unhealthy anxiety is when you just feel anxious and there's no real reason behind it. There's no feasible or visible trigger for that anxiety. Am I correct in saying that? Or what is the difference between the two?
Absolutely, Jennifer, you are correct. Unhealthy anxiety, the easiest way to pinpoint it is this affecting the quality of my life? Because You're right, healthy anxiety is there to keep us alive. If we're in the forest camping and a bear is chasing after us, we are supposed to feel anxious. We're designed to survive and run. So we want that boost of adrenaline and cortisol to get us out of a dangerous situation. But when it's unhealthy is when it's prolonged and we're still feeling anxious and there's no bear chasing after us. So let's take the example of being on that camping trip. and we saw a bear. Now we're in town and we're walking around and it's 2 days later and we're still feeling anxious. That's going to be unhealthy. It's going to keep us dysregulated in a state of panic and fight or flight, which is going to cause a lot of dis-ease in our body.
Okay, okay, 100%. So really it is, there's no real trigger behind the anxiety, and it's much more prolonged than you would experience with regular stress. For the people that are listening that might be first timers to anxiety, some people don't even know that they have it. And I, for sure, didn't know for years. I didn't understand what it was. Lately that word has become sort of a hot topic, because I think people for the first time are actually discovering what it means to have anxiety. And it's, like, wow, is this what I've had for all those years? Is this what I've gone through? So for the people that are just discovering that they possibly have gone through bursts of anxiety or prolonged anxiety, what are some of the signs, the big ones, that tell us that, or what we should be looking for that tell us that we could possibly be going through anxiety?
Absolutely. If there's like excessive worry or ruminating thoughts that might be keeping you up at night, affecting your sleep, oftentimes people with anxiety will have a hard time getting to sleep and also staying asleep. And it can also have physical symptoms as well: headaches, feeling restless or feeling on edge, feeling irritable, or feeling even nervous. You may even
Yeah.
experience like shaking or trembling in the hands. You could experience sweating. Also, you could experience high blood pressure. Prolonged anxiety can also lead to panic attacks and
Yeah.
panic disorder, and just feeling like irritable.
Yeah, and snappy and reactive, I suppose, because you would be essentially in survival mode. When you're going through anxiety, I do find that there's two ways people can go. The one way is that, if your life is possibly really out of balance and you're just feeling really anxious, like you can't really understand what's wrong, some of us withdraw from the world and become more isolated, whereas other people become a lot more confrontational and snappy, because we're just surviving. We're trying to get through the day. But you mentioned something really important, which I like, and that is the restlessness when it comes to sleep. Now, I know, for example, my husband struggles with this a lot. And the one thing that I recommend to people is to, if you're up in the middle of the night and maybe what's triggering your anxiety. Maybe it's something at work, or it's you've started a business, or something is stressing you out, and your mind starts to race the entire night, so you don't go to sleep. What I often recommend is to have a notebook next to your bed, so that you can write down everything that's bugging you in that notebook, and literally tell yourself and your brain, you know what, I've written it down, I can deal with it in the morning. And you can go back to sleep, so that your brain eventually switches off. And I find that works really well for me. Or I use the notes app on my phone, which is, not everybody has a notebook next to their bed, but I do find that works really well. The second thing is, which is an interesting topic, and you will most likely know much more about this than I, but what I find is, so your body and the cells in your body remember an emotional reaction to a certain experience or something in your external world, and that can often trigger a sense of anxiety or an emotion that you've learnt with that, that association with that external factor. What might happen is, over time, if you are in that state of stress and you feel anxious and it's a prolonged period, is there a possibility of your cells and your body falling into habitual anxiety? So it's become a learned way of being, and it's now, even though it's an uncomfortable feeling, it's become familiar because you've been in that state for so long. Does that happen with anxiety? Is it something that's quite common?
I think what you're referring to here, Jennifer, is like a childhood trauma or a traumatic
Yeah.
experience. And our body does remember. Everything is connected. There's a great book called The Body Keeps the Score by Vander Kolk, and he talks about how the body will remember things. Even if your mind doesn't remember, your body can remember. So you
Yeah.
may be in a
Yeah.
situation where all of a sudden you're filled with this very nervous, unsettled energy, but you're not sure why, and you can't quite connect the dots. And that's usually a trauma response. And so,
Interesting.
absolutely, you can experience trauma, anxiety like that from a trauma response.
Interesting. And I mean, we'll obviously dig deeper now into where anxiety could be deeper rooted. But the one thing that I did want to touch on was, you know, what I find is when I am going through a phase of anxiety and I just things are not right, I can feel that something doesn't fit and I'm not where I'm meant to be, or, I wake up with anxiety and it's quite a stressful time. What happens is I withdraw from the world, but strangely, I crave a lot more attention from my husband. So I become this extremely needy person, and I think, why is he not doing this? Why is he not doing that? Like, he doesn't give me enough love. He doesn't. When actually it's coming from me. And I only picked up this habit years later, the poor guy. So, what is the connection where it comes to a need for affection and wanting to feel validated and safe when you're going through anxiety? How are those two connected?
Absolutely, Jennifer. So, we are attachment creatures and I love relationships. We are wired for connection.
Yeah.
Neurobiologically, we crave that. And we're social creatures. Like we saw during the pandemic when we were isolated and alone,
Mm.
people had a high level of anxiety and depression because we're designed to be connected. And when you find that
Oh,
special person, they can actually ground you in a way. So if you think of anxiety as an excess of energy, um, and being able to ground that energy so that you're in a state of feeling balanced and in a wise mind state, it looks like your husband's providing that for you. So that's really
yes.
amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm very lucky. So grateful for that. So let's tap into where anxiety can be deeper rooted. And, I've seen this on multiple occasions. I've had clients that I've worked with for, over a period of a year. And I can tell when somebody is not getting past a certain mental block. And what I find is majority of the time, there's been something that is very heavily, deeply rooted in their past. Whether it's an experience, it might be a traumatic event, or it might be something that we're not even aware of that causes anxiety. What are some of the deeper rooted factors that might follow us into adulthood, or even if we had something in our adulthood that follows us that we're not even aware of?
Adverse childhood experiences, Jennifer, can affect us later in life. Traumatic events like physical abuse or even verbal abuse, um, witnessing terrible things that happen as well, watching someone die, or people that have gone to war. When we think about post traumatic stress disorder and PTSD, all of these things can trigger anxiety and trigger that state of unease. Yeah, there's a long list of traumatic experiences that people experience that affect them later in life.
Okay. And is there a possibility for people to trigger anxiety? And I'll explain that for a second. Let's say you have a very bad meeting at work, and your colleague that you're working with absolutely blasts you in the meeting. Now, every time you get a message from them, or you know that you're going to meet them, as an example, you already feel anxious. It could also be, let's say, a relationship. Maybe you're the relationship guru. Maybe you have a bad breakup, and now every time that person messages you, you go into that state of heightened anxiety. Is it possible for people to also be triggers?
Yes, absolutely. And it's funny that you
Okay.
bring up relationships because there's a theory called imago theory. And in this theory, they say that we actually seek out the person that will trigger us the most and remind
Oh,
us of the caregiver that we had the most issues with. because our body and mind, we are wanting to heal that original attachment wound.
Oh,
And we will
wow.
continue to repeat it until we heal it. So we actually
Oh,
seek that person out that will trigger that anxiety so we can start healing that wound.
that gives me a lot to think about in my world. Very interesting. And tell me, in terms of today's world, I mean, I agree with you. I think since COVID hit, a lot of people went to a very dark space. And even post COVID, a lot, the world has changed and it hasn't gone back to where it was. That's for sure. The way we do things and, the new habits that were formed, the way we work, the way we live, a lot has changed. But in that, I think where I believe there's been a really high impact is in teenagers. Now, the trendy word amongst teenagers is, oh, I'm going through anxiety, I'm an anxious person. And, I don't know whether they're overusing the term, but what is the state amongst teenagers? Do you find that you work with a lot of teenagers that are struggling with anxiety? And if so, what advice could you give to parents who have kids that they're worried about that are going through anxiety?
Absolutely, Jennifer. There does seem to be a very heightened anxiety level amongst teenagers. And when we look at COVID and the effects of that, being isolated for 2 years or more, and being away from their friends and not being in school and having the stability that they're used to. So, anxiety, you're focused on the future, right? And when you're
Oh,
depressed, you're focused on the past. And so you want to be focused on the present moment. But when something like a pandemic happens, now you have a reference. This traumatic event has happened. And then what if it happens again? And it's living in that what if space. What if this happens? And what if that happens? And
yeah.
teenagers, a lot of them are very anxious about school and their future. And there's a lot of pressure put on them, as far as making the grades to get into the college, and what are they going to do with their life. And a lot of them think they're supposed to have it all figured out at 16. And you have
Yeah.
time, lots of it.
Nobody
Nobody
has
has
their
their
life
life
figured
figured
out
out
at
at
16.
16.
I
Not
know.
even 30. you know. I think part of that, you mentioned something interesting, and that is about worrying about our future, or having regrets on the past and being depressed about the past. What I do find in especially a lot of the people that I work with is that what we tend to do as humans is we blow things completely out of proportion. So, let's say that you have to go have a meeting and you have to have an awkward conversation with somebody. Now, in your mind, you have worked through that conversation over and over and over in your head so that your anxiety is at an all-time high, and you've pictured the worst response and outcome. That even if, what I find on odd occasions, even if that potential meeting goes very well, you are in your head the entire meeting. You've visualized this so much and blown it out of proportion that you will still walk out of there thinking that the meeting didn't go great. So we tend to sort of blow things out of proportion, and we always think of the worst. What if? What if I fail? What if I'm ridiculed? What if I'm judged? And my mantra is, if something doesn't serve you, if your thought doesn't serve you, get rid of it. Because all it does is hold you back and put your state of mind in such a place where you go through these cycle mentations where you have the same conversation with yourself and your mind daily. And that itself is completely emotionally and physically draining, I think, for a lot of people. So I always tell, I go by the mantra, if it doesn't serve you, let it go, because it does absolutely no good for you. We don't have to survive like we had to, the days when there were saber-toothed tigers, and we're not under real threat on a daily basis, or a bear, but I do think our bodies still work that way, and it's fighting to protect us all the time, but unfortunately to the detriment of our well-being in many cases. So I think let's get on to, we've looked at what anxiety is, what are some of the physical effects that we experience from anxiety, what are the emotional effects, what are some of the triggers. Sometimes there are much more deep-rooted triggers that we're not even aware of, or it could be something that you're worrying about in the future. So let's have a look at what is the potential toolkit. Basically, what are the practical tools and tips that we can use to take ourselves out of that stress, anxious state and really regulate our emotions? What are some of the tools that you would recommend to people?
Absolutely, Jennifer. My favorite part of all. Because there's lots of tools and skills out there for people that are dealing with anxiety or even a state of panic. And so remember, anxiety lives in the future, right? So we want to get back to the present moment. When we're present, we're in the
100%.
here and now, we can't be anxious. So anything that we can do to get us back to the present moment, whether it be exercising or going for a walk in nature and just really observing the nature around us. One of my favorite tools is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, just using our basic five senses. So 5 things you can see and you just name them, right? I see this tree, I see this street, or I see a car, and just naming them out loud. And then 4 things you can touch. I touch the table, I touch this chair, I touch my shoulders. And 3 things you can hear, whether it's, hearing cars outside, or maybe there's some birds chirping. You're getting back to that present moment. 2 things you can smell, and then 1 thing you can taste. And by that time, you're back in the present moment and you're ready for the day.
I love that. There's Sonia Choquette also uses that technique and it's actually where I was first introduced to it, was to look around the room and look at the detail around the room and notice detail that you haven't seen before. And, guys, this is really good stuff because personally, that technique really works for me. So every time I feel really anxious, I sit in a quiet room, maybe it's the boardroom or wherever I am, and I literally look at the detail on the chair, the detail in the wood on the table, my coffee cup, the light, the speckles on the ceiling, and I go through all of those motions, and immediately I'm much more calm. And I've realized, actually, I'm in the present moment. The future cannot get me now. I'm safe, and it does. It really is a great technique. That's one that I'm a personal big fan of.
Yes, I love that one too. And I tell my clients, if you can't remember which one to do, you just remember naming things you can see. And if you just stay on that one and keep naming things you can see, after about the 5th thing you've named, and if you keep going, you're in the present moment and you're not feeling anxious anymore.
Yep. And I suppose
Another great technique I love is breath work. So when we're anxious, we tend to chest breathe and shallow breath, right? Which is just going to make us feel more panicked.
we gasp
And
for
we
air. Yeah.
we want to connect to that deep belly breathing. So just placing one hand on your heart and one hand on your belly. Inhale through your nose. Expand your belly big. Hold it at the top. And then exhale it out.
Nice.
Another great breath work technique you can do is called box breathing. So you just imagine a square in your abdomen and you inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. And a few rounds of that. And again, you'll be back in the present moment.
I love that. I find breathing also really works. That to me is a really, really great technique. And it might feel a bit funny the first time you do it. I think because it takes a bit of practice to really tune into your breathing and feel it and go through the motion. But if you do practice it daily or even weekly, you get to the point where you can master the technique of calming your nerves really quickly. And I find it works really well. Another one that I sometimes use is where you breathe in for 4 seconds through your nose, hold for 7, and then blow out slowly for 8. But the box technique is a great one as well, and I've used that on a few occasions. So really, really great technique. What are some of the other techniques that you use? Social support, maybe connecting with people online, the looking at your physical surroundings and the detail with the 5 senses, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I think is great for pulling you into the present moment. If you're really in an anxious state, it sort of grounds you and calms your nerves, as well as the breathing techniques. But if you're on a daily basis feeling very anxious and it's quite a prolonged feeling of anxiety, what are some of the other things that listeners can do to ease that?
Right. It's very important that they figure out what is triggering the anxiety. Whether they're working with a therapist or a psychologist, it's good to start journaling and writing down the moments that the anxiety is coming up and when it's the worst. So, or just
Okay.
put it in your notes in your phone, right? So maybe you're getting triggered and feeling really anxious when you're driving, or
Yeah.
perhaps when you're in a really crowded place like the supermarket or
Yeah.
standing in line. All of these things are going to give your therapist insight on how to work with you. Um,
Yeah.
and some other great things that you can do is, again, we want to get back to the present moment. So,
Yeah.
what are some ways that we can turn on our parasympathetic nervous system, which is that rest and digest? So,
Okay.
one way is very easy. You just want to get a cup of ice water. So, the
Okay.
cold will actually trigger your parasympathetic nervous system to turn on. Sometimes I recommend that my
Ah,
clients just grab a popsicle out of the freezer, or you can just splash cold water on your face to really cool down and get that parasympathetic nervous system turned on.
okay. So it's
Another great
almost a
thing
shock to your system. It sort of wakes up your system.
so it turns on that parasympathetic nervous system, which is rest and digest. When you're anxious, you tend to run hot when you're in your
Yes.
sympathetic state.
Okay.
So you want to cool down. Think of, you know, how people say chill out?
Yeah.
Just cool
Yeah.
down.
Okay. Interesting. I've never heard that one before. That's very interesting.
Yeah, there's also something called progressive muscle relaxation. So we could do it together, Jennifer.
Okay, I'm
So you
ready.
just you want to tighten your muscles as you inhale. And so we'll just do it together. We'll inhale and we'll tighten our muscles as tight as we can. Everything very tight, tight, tight. And then when we exhale, we just relax everything.
I like that. I use that in meditation daily, and it really relaxes your body. I really like that technique.
Suggest that clients do this before they go to bed, and you just start muscle group by muscle group. And so start with your feet. So you tighten your feet as tight as you can and then relax them. And then your legs and work your way up the body until you get to your head. And most likely you'll probably be really relaxed before you get to your head or possibly asleep.
And I think you'll have a better night's sleep. I think that's a really good technique. Dr. Melissa, thank you. I think these are really insightful and these tips are really practical and you can do them anywhere, you know. And personally, they really work for me. The only technique that we haven't discussed yet that I do is, and it sounds a bit silly and you might feel, you know, or the listeners might feel a bit silly doing it for the first time, but what I find really works is telling yourself what you need to hear. So that could be, for example, I would say to myself, you are safe, you are loved, and everything's going to be okay. And the first time I did that, I felt really silly. But the second and the third and the fourth, it really calmed me down. And I thought to myself, you know what? Everything is actually okay. Like nothing is happening right now. We're not in immediate danger right now. You know, everything that's causing this is all in your mind. Literally, your mind is what's causing all of these emotions. So I find that really works well for me as well. But I do believe that the techniques that you've mentioned now are really helpful, and I know that they will help a lot of people. I believe a lot of people have anxiety and they don't even realize it. And I've seen, funny enough, you mentioned panic attacks. I know that you specialize in that as well. Explain to me what happens when we have a panic attack. And I'm asking this because I personally have never had one, but I have seen many people that have, and nobody actually understands it. And I think it's quite a serious thing, and it can feel a lot more serious and life-threatening than what is actually happening. Or is it life-threatening? I'm not sure. But what happens when we go through a panic attack?
Absolutely. So think of anxiety times 100. Your frontal cortex, which is your ability to make reason, logic, and your willpower, the frontal part of your brain goes completely offline. So you're in a state
Okay.
of complete panic and fight or flight, and you're not
Okay.
able to regulate. Some people may even feel like they're having a heart attack. Oftentimes, they will go to the emergency room claiming that they are having a heart attack, but it's actually just a panic attack. And again, you're just wanting to bring your system back into the present moment as quickly as possible, which could feel really hard to do.
Yeah.
So even things like simple breath work, like inhaling through your nose and exhaling through your mouth, may not feel accessible in those times. So
Yeah.
I recommend a technique called straw breathing, where you simply just breathe out as if you're breathing through a straw, like this.
Like you're blowing a candle.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
And a few rounds of that, if you're feeling panicked, can
Mhm.
bring you back to the present moment and just calm down your central nervous system.
When you go through a panic attack, I've obviously never had one. Does all reason go out the window? Are you in a state of mind where you don't have logic, or you're just in a complete state of fear?
Yes, so the answer is yes, absolutely. Some people describe seeing black, and other people just feel completely panicked. You cannot think with your rational mind whatsoever. You feel like you're going to die. A very terrible feeling.
Oh, shame. Okay. Well, thank you so much. Look, before we end off, I do want to touch on your book, Tantra Mindfulness Therapy, that is launching in August. How exciting. Tell me about your book, and how will this, how does this touch on anxiety? This is super exciting.
Yes, a lot of why I created Tantra Mindfulness Therapy is because White Tantra had so many tools and tips to offer people that actually struggle with anxiety and panic and depression. And a lot of people don't know these tools.
Yeah.
Things like meditation and mindfulness, different types of breath work that really just help you regulate your system. There's also lots of tips and tricks as far as goal setting and being able to take these overwhelming tasks and break them down into small, manageable steps to just help people really feel regulated and stay on track.
I love that. I think so many people in today's world need that. I think we're overloading ourselves. We're trying to do everything and anything. And so many people are living in a state of overwhelm, where we don't know how to regulate our emotional responses and state of mind. And I think all of these techniques are going to be really helpful. We've covered what is anxiety, what are the causes of anxiety, what are the deep rooted causes and triggers of anxiety, whether it's external experiences or traumatic experience that may have occurred. And also, which is most important, is the toolkit to overcoming your anxiety. And those are the breathing technique, which is the box technique, the 5 4 3 2 1 technique, where you look around the room, you notice the detail, and you go through your five senses to really just ground you in that moment. Some of the other techniques, so walking outside, going into nature, I find that really works for me. I am an avid nature fan. I love it. It just gives me clarity, and it is one of the best techniques that I find works really well. And then obviously social support as well, so reaching out to people on Facebook or people that are going through the same thing so that you can connect. You know, the topic of relationships is huge because we are human and we need that connection and we need that interaction and engagement with significant others in our lives. So really important. And I think we tend to underestimate that a lot. We have amazing people in our lives that we can tap into, that understand us and that can give us what we need in that time when we feel really anxious and we're struggling. And then, of course, the relaxation technique, really going through each muscle in your body and just tightening it and letting go until everything is really relaxed. And I think doing that before bed is great because I believe that it will help your body really relax and go to sleep and have a much more restful sleep than what you probably have been if you're going through anxiety. So, Dr. Melissa, thank you. This has been amazing. These practical tools and tips are going to help people. I know it. It's a game changer. And I am so excited for your book to come out. I will be one of the first people to order it, and I will give you all of the feedback and notes. Super exciting. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much and have a wonderful week. To everybody else, thank you for listening. You can follow Dr. Melissa Gentry on Instagram. She gives really great tips daily. I promise you it will change your life. Until then, keep going. You've got this. I believe in you.
What you gonna do when the rain is coming down? Nothing more to do when there's no one else around. Bring it back to the middle, push, take it back to the rhythm.